Can we start with your name, your date and place of birth, and your current status, please?
Yes, so my name is Willem Frijhoff. I was born in a small city, a small medieval city of the Netherlands, Zutphen, the 31st of May 1942, during the war. And I have been a professor at several universities, the last one being one of the universities of Amsterdam. And after my retirement, 9 years ago, I got some other assignments, and the last one was at the Erasmus University, Rotterdam, where I started, in fact, in the 80s, in the early 80s. But I am back here, and I have a hospitality contract. That means that I can use this office once a week, and I'll have some other facilities. That's it.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing and your education, please?
Yes. Well, I have a rather peculiar history. I am my father was a photographer, and I'm the oldest child of the family, the oldest of four sons. And I am from a Catholic family, and I wanted to be a priest. So I went to the seminary, a Catholic seminary, where I studied philosophy and theology. I was ordained a priest, and then the Bishop of Utrecht, my diocese, asked me if I wanted to continue studying. I said, yes, it interests me. I always felt very much attracted to history. So where to study history? And then we came out on Paris, because I knew the French historical school of Brodel and Lefebvre, that were my heroes by then. And so in '66, when I was ordained a priest, I went to Paris to study history. And I thought, at first I wanted to study history of the spirituality. But when I came in Paris, I discovered that it was not possible. I had to start at the beginning in the first year. I had already done 6 years of higher education study, but I started again. So I was not the youngest of students. I was 24 when I started my study in history. And what happened in Paris is, when I came there, I discovered that the foreign students were put in special groups, because most of the foreign students had to work. So they couldn't study during the day. We had our groups in the evening. For me, that was very interesting, because immediately I had a very international group around me. So that gave a wonderful experience. And then I was housed in a convent of a Catholic congregation, the Lazarists. There's a missionary congregation who works especially in Asia. And they had a convent in the middle of Paris. I had a room there, but the interesting point was that that convent also was very international. So contrary to most of the students who lived among each other in the French environment, I had a very international experience. Yeah. And that was important also for May '68 for me. Because from the start I discussed a lot with people from other countries, and that's sometimes other ideas than the French students. That's it. I kept a diary. I have it in front of me, a small one. I can show it to you. That's one. So I can retrieve everything that happened, even the days I was on the street and things like that.
Before we get to the events, I mean, what did you make of the French education system?
Well, at that moment it was very old-fashioned, and that was one of the reasons why I understood very well what happened. It was the Gaullist period, when France always has been I would say a traditional country with a very hierarchical setup of all the systems, including the educational system. But in the Gaullist period, it was still worse. It was really autocratic, and people were really not content with that. afterwards, in the early 70s, I married a French, I left the priesthood in my parish period. I married a French girl, and she is very open-minded, but she comes from a very old-fashioned family too, where I recognize all those things I do not like, and that are very typical for France, for old France, not the actual France. So that's the French education system was by then not only old-fashioned, but not well organized. In Paris, we had 2,000 students in history in '68. 2,000 in history. That means the great lecture hall was full of 2,000 students, and we had to enter by special doors according to the first letter of our name. So I had the F entrance and things like that. But that was, I would say, very inhuman. It was not people friendly, you know. It was a system we didn't like, and I think that was one of the reasons why students wanted something much more humanized. And that's what I find in my papers too. That's what I thought at that moment. And the French education system always has been a system where the best are selected, and people who do not perform according to the standards are rejected. And that, I think, it's largely still that way. I did not change very much because it's very typical of French society. It's not something that has to do only with education, but French society is a hierarchical society. It still is, I think, very much. And it is very good for you if you have money and if you have brains and if you have a position at the start of parents.
Yeah.
But if you have neither the one or the second or the third, it's bad. You cannot find your way. And that's the reason why I think in French society that in principle is rather open to people from outside. People from outside cannot find their way because there are always these 3 or 4 problems you have to solve beforehand. Yeah. And that's what happened too in '68, I think.
Okay. Do you think, can you recall thinking that something was going to happen in France, or was it a surprise when it came
No,
out?
it was not really a surprise. I think we were not content with what happened, and I look in my little booklet, my diary, and I see on May 3, that was the first day when something happened, 3 May 1968, I translate, it has happened. The faculty has been closed. So that means on that moment, I think we expected something like that. We expected that the problems were resolved by a drastic measure by the authorities. And that's what happened in fact. And I wrote, we can understand it, but they have judged too quickly, and it is a too easy manner to solve the problems. That means we were aware of the problems, but by then we didn't see either what should happen, what would have to happen. And when the authorities took the first measures on May 3, 4, 5, there immediately became a reaction because from that moment people saw this is a moment where we have to do something, we have to find solutions, and solutions, well, to go on the street and everything that happened, you know. So it was more, something was expected, I think.
And did that sense of something coming, was that only linked to the world of education, or was there a feeling that society?
No, I think for us, at least for me, it was linked to the world of education. But rather quickly, we discovered that those things lived everywhere. Well, I was not a Frenchman, so perhaps I didn't feel it in the way French people felt it. But I know that my present-day wife, who was a girl in school at that moment, I didn't know her at that moment before, but she told me afterwards that in her school, her secondary school, things were also moving from the first day. And the the young girls and the young men immediately went to the center of Paris to participate in what happened. So there was something going on, we felt it, and but what exactly, that I think that was discovered during the events. We had to react and discover then that other people reacted too. That's the way I see it.
And was there any sense that there were international issues that were of importance as well?
Yes, of course, because we had already in the Netherlands the movement Provo. And that was very well known in Paris. The Provo people came immediately to Paris when something happened. And we had in the Sorbonne a kind of a Dutch institute, Institut Nederlandais, immediately during the events, and the people from Amsterdam came there. So there was an awareness from the start that in some countries, in the Netherlands, but also in Germany, also they already had some problems. But in the Netherlands, there was the movement Provo that has nothing to do with education, but was a youth movement, very powerful and very influential at that moment. Yes.
So what was your actual situation in 1968? Were you a second-year student at university?
I was a second-year student, yes. I was a second-year history student, and we didn't discuss very much during the study hours on these events, because several of the staff, several members of the staff, they're very against the student movements, and they try to avoid any discussion. And besides, there were so many students. We had in our working groups sometimes 80 or 90 students. There was no time, no opportunity to discuss. So everything passed outside the official buildings. That was the idea.
Okay. And had you been involved prior to 1968 in any political or social activism?
Well, social, cultural, yes, but political, no. When I was in the Grand Seminary in the beginning of the 60s, we had some discussion groups, I would say, political discussion groups, and we invited people from political parties. I remember quite well. I was a theology student. We invited the people from the Communist Party. That was quite a revolution. In a Catholic seminary, invite communists, but they came and we discussed. So that was very good. But that was the kind of relations we had with people. I have never been member of a political party.
Okay. So can you tell me how you started to become involved, or how you noticed something was starting to happen at the beginning of May?
Yes, as a student, because immediately, it was on the May 3, when the university was closed, it was closed. We had to be somewhere else. And as I lived in the center of Paris, everything that happened was in front of my eyes. I saw everything, we participated to everything. So immediately there was a kind of I would see a very effective movement among friends and co-students, telling each other, and well, we met normally each evening somewhere in Paris. We had dinner together always. In my diary, I always noted where I had dinner. The 4 May in Brunel with a friend. You said things like that. It is what one calls in France the téléphone arabe. That was the way news was distributed. We discussed about it, and I think we all agreed about what happened, because everyone has the same experience of something real that was not good in society, something social that was not good. It was not only an educational thing. It started as an educational thing, and then very quickly the social dimension came on top of that. And you know perhaps the book by Michel de Certeau, La prise de parole. Well, that was the revelation for every one of us. I knew personally Michel de Certeau because I made a living by translating articles from French into Dutch. So I translated several of his articles, and I went to see him. So I knew him, but when his book came out, The Priest de Parole, it really was a revelation, because everyone in my group said that's what we felt, that there is something going on the level of participation by speech, by discussion and things like that. And from that moment on, one can speak. We could speak, we could discuss things as we wanted to do. So that, I think that was very important, and that's exactly what happened. We had a lot of reunions every day.
And how did you contribute? Were you an observer, or were you part of the movement?
I was well, what happened in Paris in May '68, the organizers, the student organizers, immediately said the foreign students do not have to participate because they risk to be imprisoned or put outside the country, etc., etc. So they kept us at a certain distance.
Okay.
What happened is that I was involved in, say, the normal activities. I participated to the groups, the cortège, etc., and things like that. And then to the Dutch Institute, the Institute Nederlandais. That was normal, that was permitted. But we, as foreign students, we were at a certain distance. One of my friends, my female friends, I see her every year from God still. She had a big room in the Rue Mouffetard, at the very center, the very heart of it. And there we came together. It was a kind of a meeting place where everybody came and discussed things like that. So it was very informal, very effective. And that were all students from different countries, because that friend, she is English. She is an English girl, and she remained in France as a translator, married a Frenchman. That happened to most of us. I married a French girl, you know. And so that's why we keep, several of us still keep in contact every now and then. It made us, it gave us a kind of a camaraderie, I think. That still, it lasted a long time for many of us, yeah.
And what were you talking about?
What were we talking about?
Yeah,
well, it's difficult to know. It's 50 years ago, you know. But I remember very well that were you talking about revolution, or were you talking about reform? Well, in my memory, the word revolution isn't there, but in my diary, it is very often. And the way we discussed was, I would say, was very sharp in very strong words always. He spoke about revolution and wanted indeed something like a political revolution, but not knowing exactly what to think of that, because there was from the start a problem between the students and the social, I would say, what do you call it in English? The syndicat. The syndicat. There was the syndicat were not of our. In my group, there was a kind of a link, because you know perhaps the phenomenon of the prêtre ouvrier, the priest who worked. Well, there were some of them. They were part of both groups, of our group and of the syndicat. So that was the link between them. But normally there was no link. Students didn't speak with, they tried to speak with workers, but nothing came out, you know. They had another idea about revolution and social progress. But we spoke a lot about revolution, yes. And a total change of society. That's why the words of the secretary are so important. Because what he tried to say is that La prise de parole means that there is another way of communication between the people, and another cultural, I would say, sort of kind of cultural revolution that's going on. That was the idea.
Okay.
Much more cultural than political, I think.
So how did you experience the events then as they grew and became more serious?
Well, they became more and more political. That's the point. At the start, they were not really political events; they were social. And I would say I was not really very happy with the politicization of everything, because that means that the real left wing, the extreme left wing people, became more and more important. You know, the La Gauche Révolutionnaire and people like that. There were several groups, and we didn't like that. I was more from the, I would say, direction of what was then called the UNEF, the Union Nationale Zitting on the one side, the more moderate, still wanting some change, but the moderate group of students. And I think most of us were that. The real extreme left wing is very French. That's not Dutch. Dutch do not have things like that. And the other people I know, mostly it's the same. I know several of my friends came from I would say, difficult countries, from Palestine, Yugoslavia, that still was communist at the moment, things like that. There are quite a lot of them in the group I was in, but they neither wanted a real revolution. It was more, we wanted change, but not a new authority on top of that. Yeah? You didn't want to obey other authorities. Mm-hmm. It was, we had to have a free speech, a free culture, you know, to do what we wanted. And I have a page here where I speak of the échec des partis politiques. That's what we found. These partis politiques were outdated, and that new system had to be installed in France and in Europe in general.
Okay. And how did you experience day-to-day life once the strike took hold?
Oh, that was difficult. Well, not for me, because I lived in the center of Paris. I could do everything walking. But it was, I think, for many of my friends, it was difficult. They lived on the outskirts, and they couldn't come, and nothing worked. You know, libraries closed, things like that. So, well, you had to live with the people of your group, and I think it was not easy. Many people were glad that it was over. Because that a normal life returned, you know, and the normal life meant for us that we had a new university system. You know, the university changed very much. They broke the Sorbonne in 14 or officially 20 smaller universities. And anyway, I was then in my third and fourth year. That meant that I wasn't really a day-to-day student anymore. I did research and things like that, and I worked for some professors because I had to earn my living. So that was, for me, it was different, I think. But for the normal students, it was rather complicated. It was not easy. And the problem of the foreign students was that most of us needed an examination in order to get money for the next year. And for the French, it was different. That meant that they organized at the end of June '68 special examinations for the people from other countries. And I was there too. For me, it was not as important as that, but it still was very useful. So we had a special examination session only for foreign students. Very serious session, I must say. There were no facilities offered to the foreigners. Well, for me it was all right, but yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier the idea of student-worker fraternity and how it didn't happen. Can you just talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, that didn't happen, I think, because first of all, the workers didn't like the students. They didn't want us to participate in the same cortege, you know. That was the first thing. And the second is that most of the students who were active in the student movement were not of workers' origin. There were quite a lot of students of workers' origin, but in my opinion, in my idea, they didn't really participate. It was very much a middle class phenomenon, I think. not higher class either, because in France the higher class students were mostly right wing. You know, that was still very typical at that moment. It was very middle class, I think. And that means that the links with the workers' movement were not as important as that. They came especially through those left-wing groups. I don't remember the names now, but there were several groups that well, they were ideologically very much involved in the evolution of society, like either communist or other left-wing movements, and they made the link with the workers. And I remember the big how do you call it, the cortege, the 13 May, it was, I think, was the biggest one. This was 2 million people or something like that. And there were groups, a workers group, a students group, but nothing together.
Okay, great. You've mentioned on several occasions the phenomenon of la prise de parole,
Yes.
and you've explained it really well. But
Yeah.
why do you think that was such an important element?
Yes, I think because what I did tell you that I collectioned rather quickly. I discovered that what's very typical for the movement is that there were everywhere text and slogans, not only on tracts, small papers and things like that, but also on the walls of the houses, everywhere. And then another thing that was quite striking was the affiche, or how do you call it?
Posters.
The posters. They came from the Beaux-Arts, but there were quite a lot of them. And immediately I started to collect them. I have the very oldest one, I still have it, but the other ones I gave them to the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam. They have my collection. And there were hundreds of them. And it was very striking because there were always texts on it. And I have in my diary quite a lot of those texts. I noted them on the street when I walked on the street. And that struck me because it was really very typical for this movement. Before, people like students couldn't speak. It was not their task in society. They had to study. What happened is, from that moment, they had something to say. And they had the obligation to say things like that, to participate in the development of social welfare, of social communications, things like that. So this was, I think, from the beginning, I thought that was very important. I think many people also wrote. You had the small movement. You know, I think the situationist. Do you remember that? Do you know that situationist? Well, that was from the start. I was very interested in it. I bought everything they published, and because that was a little bit the extreme side of the communication sector, and I think that many students were interested by it. They were not members because it was too highbrow, you know, it's too ideological. But it was something everybody felt that was what happens, and that's what is important for us as well.
Great.
And then came the booklet of the Salon, but also others. Michel Foucault also wrote things in that moment that put everything together in a big single story, you know, in a narrative about what happens, and that was a revelation, in my opinion.
Good. Do you think that May 68 was a violent moment?
And well, the moment was violent, but in the long run, it has not been violent. I think it has. I'm not sure it has changed a lot in French society. It has changed a lot for particular persons. For myself, it was a kind of a liberation. Going to France was already a liberation, but then 3 years after that, it was a liberation, and I'm sure that it was the same for other people. For example, I have a Catalan friend in Catalonia who was in the same group, and he always has told it that that was his moment of liberation from that very heavy Spanish, still Franco environment, you know. But in France with de Gaulle it was very different, you know. It was a very closed society. And for us it was a manner of liberating ourselves of those ties that came from everywhere. That was the point. I'm not sure that it was really a point of change. In my diary, I have I tried to, because of my diary served to have ideas. I have a small I can show it here. A small list of important events in the French in the French history. 1905, separation of church and state. 1936, Force for Front Populaire. 1968, Commune Étudiante. So for me, that moment, it was a very important point. I'm not sure now that it was as important as that, but it liberated a lot of energy also. People there could express themselves and, well, voice what they felt, what they expressed. That's the point. That's why I see at Prise de Parole, we are trained to say and to make something in words about our feelings, to tell what happens. I felt it that way, and I think that it remains important for that reason. For example, my wife also is told that in secondary school, everybody started to speak. There were small groups and her class, it's rather typical, her class still comes every year together. They had a kind of a revelation about the importance of the group as a boiling system for making things happen. Did you encounter any police violence during the event? No, I personally not. No. I have walked a lot around Paris. I have that's something that amuses me a lot. Seeing it again, I didn't know that. I can show it to you. I went in the night of from 10 to 11 May. I strolled through Paris and I noticed all the barricade I found. So I was everywhere, but I personally I never have had any police violence. Okay. Were you aware that the events of Paris were also happening elsewhere in France? Yes, elsewhere in France not so much, but elsewhere in the world, yes. We were keen on knowing what happened in California and things like that, and in other countries. In France, something happened in other cities, but that didn't reach Paris, I think. Not very much. People sometimes must have come to Paris, but I was not aware of that. And why was the International so important? Why was the International so important? I don't know why. It came to us. What happens, of course, is that, for example, the Dutch came to Paris and the Germans came to Paris. Cohn-Bendit, for example, German origin people. Quite a lot of others of them, perhaps English. I don't remember seeing English people, but they came to see what happens, and then we discussed with them. But I think that's the point. Okay. It was not a point of reference. Only the Dutch, the Provo, because they were the predecessors, the Provo movement of Amsterdam. That they were fellows, not on the student side, but on the general cultural side. Okay. What did you think of the political elite in '68? So de Gaulle, Pompidou, Mitterrand, Mendes France. Very bad. I didn't think very much because it was not my country, but what we in general thought of them, and I agree with that, they were not acting, I would say, with intelligence. No, they were not, didn't understand what happened, and when they reacted, it was always from an authoritarian point of view. And what we wanted was not authority, because our authority is something was something from the past, was more, I wouldn't say compassion, but conviviality, something like that. So try to understand this and to take measures that show that you understand this. So that didn't happen, because the answer of the authorities was always closing things, imprisoning people, sending police and things like that. So that's, I think, we didn't get a very good impression of the authorities. And well, that doesn't mean that the people from those periods didn't become authorities themselves, but that's not a point. That's not a point. I'm a professor too. No, but that's life, I would say. But it was not, the French authorities were not our friends.
Okay.
No, not in the beginning and not at the end. No, at all.
As a student, as a student priest, someone studying to become a priest, did that put you in a specific position? Did that give you a different experience?
No, the only experience I had that was interesting. Some people, not everybody knew that, but the people who knew it, some of them considered me as a kind of a spiritual mentor. You know, they discussed a bit more with me than with others, and a bit more deeply. That happened. But it didn't. I'm not sure it did change my position. No, I don't think so.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier how some people felt that they were relieved when the events came to a conclusion because they could go back to normal. How did you feel? Were you disappointed? Were you relieved?
I was a bit disappointed, but not really, because you could see it. And then something I have to say you, I was still a priest at that moment. And during the month of July and August, I had to make my civil living by acting as a priest on the countryside. There were people, the curate or the reverend went on holidays, and I took over his parish for a month. Things like I did that. And I was in 4 parishes on the Loire, near Blois. And that was very interesting, because it was nice people. They invited me every time to come and speak about Holland and about what happened in Paris. So I told it, I don't know how many times, and I understood that they were interested because they didn't understand anything of what had happened in Paris. It was very strange for them. It was another world.
Very good. Can you recall how your friends or family back home felt while you were in Paris in '68?
I'm not sure that they were very interested or even very knowing about what happened. It was in the Netherlands, there was a group of people who spoke about it, but I don't think it was very much in the papers. Only the highlights, you know, the occupation of the Salon, something like that, and the big manifestation, but not very much. My parents came once, not during those months, but a bit afterwards. But I'm not the impression that they were impressed about what happened. It was another world. That's my idea. It was another world for them, and Parish people are always a bit strange. You know, the French. They have their own way of, a bit excited way of doing things. That's what the Dutch think, and the English probably too. And it will pass. And it passed, you know. I think I read through my diary yesterday, and I got the impression that I was very much disappointed at the end. It was slowing down, you know. It was slowing down.
Okay. How do you think 1968 impacted France, both short term and long term?
On the short term, surely, I think that well, people are much very much impressed, or anyway, they asked questions about what happened. It appelait, as the French say. It appelait to something. They didn't know exactly what, but they had to think about what happened. But, well, the problem is that most of the people in France, I think, was very afraid of a radical left-wing government. They didn't want that. And revolution, no revolution. That was the idea. The word revolution was forbidden, I think, outside the group where we were. So I'm not sure the impact, with the exception of the disappearance of the goal from the political field. That was an important point. That had important consequences. But what happened afterwards, it was not so different from what happened before. It remained a rather authoritarian country. It only slowly changed into what it is now, I think. Well, in the long term, on that moment I thought it was a turning point in history. I'm not sure that it has been, and I would say one of the things I noted in my diary, in my memory too, is that on that moment already, the relations between the people of French origin and those of foreign origin, that mean the Maghreb at that moment, and the French old-time colonies, were changing, very important. We discussed about them. And that's what happened in nowadays. The French society has major problems with people from foreign origin. That's one of the major problems of France, I think. Things were already underway. It's not a consequence of May 68, but they were already underway. And then May 68 perhaps has been the point where people realized that something was going on and tried to find first solutions. Yes, I think so, yes. But on the long way, I don't know. The political system of France has not substantially changed. It is the same. There's a president, and a very, very powerful president, in fact, and political parties that are virtually changing every year, but remain always themselves, and things like that. I'm not sure that it has really changed a lot, but it has changed, I think. That's perhaps the relations within the university, because after May 68, students, well, I wouldn't say that they were really powerful, but they discussed a lot more, and the very powerful position of the professors had declined a bit, I think. That really is what happened.
So would you describe the consequences of 1968 as largely positive or negative?
Yes, no, largely positive. I would say largely positive, but perhaps a bit without us knowing how it went, how it became positive. It's in a general movement towards a more positive, positive outcome, I would say. Yes.
Okay. Do you think that these events and your experience of these events had some impact on how you understand France?
Yes, I'm sure, because, well, of course, I'm now very much involved in French society because of my wife and the family. But already in that moment, I didn't know her by then, but that moment too, because I was very intrigued by what happened. French society for me was very different from Dutch society, and it still is. So I tried, as an historian, of course, I tried to understand how that society functioned, and in my diary I find quite a lot of examples of reflections on what is French society, what is going on. I have pages and pages on it. I wrote in the evenings. And so I think that was very important, yes, for me. And I think that was the same for other foreign students came there. And in particular, there were quite a lot of students from the third world countries. What people don't call them anymore third world countries, but with Africa, Asia, and Latin America too, quite a lot of them. So I think that those people must have experienced well a different France, the possibilities that France gave them, and that could be used in their own countries. That's because the exploitation of May 68 has been important. In many countries it has become a reference, a kind of reference, due to those people who were there and came back home. So that happened with me too. I spoke a lot about it with friends in the Netherlands, and I wrote 2 or 3 small articles on it. And 10 years ago, when we had the 40 years, I was on the radio with in a program to discuss it with other people who had the same experience. You came here too. So I think it was something that has a long-lasting influence on our personal experience. Yes.
And would you say that it had an impact on you personally, or did it change? Yes. Or in what way?
Well, on a personal, I think the impact on my personal vision, I would say that I think I'm now accustomed, due to this, to interrogate much more social structures, social relations, how people act among each other, and what is the cultural impact of those actions. I have become a cultural historian. I was not at the beginning, but I'm now very intrigued by what I would say everyday life. How are things going? What happens? How do people be involved in cultural relations, in cultural models and things like that? And that's what came out of the event for me.
And do you think, would it be fair to say that your experience of 1968 had an impact on your scholarship or your career trajectory?
Absolutely. Career, perhaps not, because after May 68, I made my diplôme d'études approfondies, my master, things like that, and that was on something very different. And anyway, the professors had seen me as an intelligent historian. They gave me some jobs, and it was, in fact, my stay in France was not very good for my career. I had a very low position because the French didn't want foreign people on fixed positions. It was revocable every month, things like that. And only when I came back in the Netherlands in '81, I got a fixed firm position at the university. But what happens is that my French experience was important when I came back in the Netherlands. The French experience was considered a rich experience and an innovating experience. I was considered a man with an innovating approach of history, which in the 80s I think was true. That has changed by now. But the cultural vision of history, I would say the culturalized vision of history. It's not on high culture, it's more on general culture, on the social culture. That was new. And nobody was really interested in it. And I have an English colleague I know him very well, Peter Burke. I don't know if you knew him. Peter Burke, he is a little bit older than I am. But we very soon we were on the same level of discussion and things like that. And another one who I do not like personally, but he is good historian, Simon Schama. He's a bit of the same approach of history as I am.
And do you think 68 had a role in that?
I think for me, the 68 had a role in that because it freed us from the very mechanical vision of social relations in history. And it showed us that far from political parties and ideological positions, there were also something like relations between people, like models of behavior that circulate in society, like problems of memory. I worked a lot later on the places of memory and things like that. And that comes from there. That's the idea that history is transmitted through schemes of memory in the heads of people, you know. And it comes from that period, I think, because that's the way I experience it.
Okay. Speaking of memory, so as someone who experienced the events in France,
Yeah.
and someone who's interested in history, obviously, I would assume that you have built up an understanding of how the story of 1968 has been told over the years. And I wondered if you thought that the dominant narrative or the story that dominates is something that you feel fully captures your experience of 1968.
Well, I think the story of May 1968 is finished in France. I'm not sure that it's no history. What I read about it, that really is history. It's another period with people that have grown old and things like that. And that's not really how I feel it, because for me it still is very present. It's very present. So I don't think there is not much narrative about May 68 in France, I think, this moment. It is a bit finished. Well, there are, every now and then there is an article, you know, but it's not something that I see, at least, that I see come up in difficult moments or something like that. The experience is not a lived experience anymore, it's a dead experience. And that for me it's not the same, but it's normal because I was in it. And it has structured part of my reflection of my attitude to life. But it's not true for more people, of course, that's quite normal. But there is no story, I think. Well, I do not see a story of May 68. It's the past. I have the impression. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much the past. I would agree. But do you feel that the way that past is now recounted is something that captures your experience? Does it reflect your experience?
Every now and then I see it pass a bit of it in the press or in articles. Well, it's an analysis, I would say. It's an analysis that goes as analysis go. It doesn't, I think, well, what was the essence of May 68? That is the spark, the flame that was ignited in our minds, our bodies, our experiences that is past. You cannot reconstruct it in an article.
Yeah. Okay, and one final question. If you were asked to summarize your experience of 68 in 30 seconds, how would you do it?
Oh, God. 30 seconds. Well, I think that I have lived there a marvelous experience of France, of first, but much more still of how people can get together towards something that goes beyond their imagination. That's the fact. That's the point.
Okay.
You know, there was one point. I saw one of the first evenings. I went to a cabaret of Paco Ibáñez. So you know Paco Ibáñez, a Spanish singer. Well, that was, for me, he embodied that spirit. The free Spanish singer singing about life, about politics, about everything. Something like that. I still like him very much, his songs. Yeah.